Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Princess Cake. I know we've been waiting a month to get to do this, so it's good to be together. Terry, it's great to have you back, and that your house is in good shape for tonight. This is Mike Scott. I'm the program director at Farm Table Foundation, and tonight's class is with one of our favorite instructors, Terry Kelzer, who's been teaching and cooking pretty much her whole life. And then in the early 70s, she and her husband kind of almost homesteaded in the place there and grew a lot of their own food, including a lot of their own meat and animals. And she's continued to be involved in cooking, partly through being such a generous person to Farm Table. She also cooked for Head Start for 28 years, I think. And so it's a delight to have her here, a delight to have you all with us. I think this is gonna be an interesting class. It looks like a pretty complicated cake, one that's also has an interesting story that I'm sure Terry will tell us a little bit about. So Terry, welcome, and welcome to you all. Terry, please take it away, thanks.
All right, our princess cake, our princess torta is our feature today. It's a very special Swedish cake. It's a favorite iconic cake. One week in September, they bake hundreds of thousands of these cakes, and part of the proceeds go to children's hospitals all around the country. It's just really been an important cake historically in Swedish society. Jenny Åkerström is credited with inventing the cake. At the turn of the century, it'd be 1905 or so, she was selected to teach the princesses. It was a tradition over hundreds of years that the children of the royals would be taught by the best teachers, professors at all the university schools throughout the country. And when their children became a certain age, they would go to the universities and interview people and what their topics were, and how good they would fit with their children. This was usually only done with boys, of course. The male heir was the one who needed the best education. Our Prince Carl, brother of King Gustav, had 3 daughters, and usually daughters were left not with considered that they needed the university education, although they were expected to learn languages and things like that. But this new science came on board at about that time, and it was called home economics, and it was considered to just be the cutting edge. And so that if you were really important, you wanted to be out front and have the princesses learn about cooking, because it wasn't just something people did, it was a science. And so it was important, and they were proud to learn about these things for a change. The cake itself was made for Princess Margarita's birthday, and Jenny Åkerström wanted to put together all her favorite things, which was cake and custard and raspberry jam and whipping cream and marzipan. All the children love marzipan. So this is the cake that she invented. I'm going to say that for this cake, it is a little complicated, and usually I think you want to give 2 days you want to have to make a cake like this. You want to do your cakes ahead so they're done and cooled. You want to do your custard ahead so that's all cooled and set up. And you want to either make up some fresh raspberry puree jam or have some available ahead. And then the whipping cream is usually done the same day as you put the cake together. I will start. I'm going to ask, if you have done a lot of cakes, if you have done a lot of sponge cakes at all, if that's something that people are familiar with. This recipe that I'm using is the most classic sponge cake recipe that goes back 200 years or so at the least. This was when people were first learning to make bread lighter and to make it sweet, and so it just became a very popular cake. The steps are first the egg and sugar process, and first we start with our eggs and sugar. On your recipe, I believe that I changed it to 1 1/4 cup sugar. I'm not sure if that's on your recipe, but do check, because I changed it back to 2 1/4 cups sugar total, but it is divided into 1 cup and 1 1/4 cups. So maybe it is always helpful to add that little note on your recipe, because a lot of times it's just easy to say 2 1/4 cup sugar, okay, dump it in, and then you're, oops, no, this part goes for this part goes for that. So if you do a setup beforehand, that helps too, so that you know that you have your first bunch and your second bunch. We're going to start with the classic step. We have a dozen eggs, and they are divided, and we're going to take our egg yolks first, and we're going to combine them with a cup of sugar.
And just so you know, folks, if you have questions, feel free to type them in that chat box. I should have mentioned that. And I've just added a couple things in there in the chat box, and one of them I just said should be 2 1/4 cups sugar total.
Right. And then
type them in there and I'll convey them to Terry.
I'm going to set it over this pan of simmering water I have here. And I'm just going to turn here like this. And what we're going to do, it just takes a minute or two, and we're going to melt that sugar. You don't want that to get too hot, of course. You don't want to cook your eggs, but it just takes a minute or two. And what you're doing by melting the sugar first is it's going to take less time to whip it into a ribbon. Otherwise, you could be whipping 10, 20 minutes, and this just really cuts that time down to just a couple minutes. And also, there's an overall kind of plan. You want to keep your batter a little bit on the warm side, but always being careful that remembering that you have eggs, so you can't get too warm. Now I would say our sugar is already melted, and it's going to go into our pan, and then put it on our KitchenAid. I think we could get it thicker, but at least you can see it's starting to thicken up. And it's going to be good enough for our demonstration, but just gives you an idea how much time these various things take. And then with our egg whites, to go in here, a dozen egg whites, and this time we're going to, with our egg yolks, we're going to add to them a little dash of salt, and I believe it's a couple teaspoons of vanilla. Since vanilla's gone to so terribly expensive, I'm a little more careful about how much I use. I should just dump it in. Now we're just going to beat up these till they're nice and stiff. So that won't be the last of our noise, I think. First, you want to just get to a foam, a soft foam on top, which happens pretty quickly. And then you want to add all your sugar just very gradually. I mix in the vanilla and the salt into here.
Someone just was kind of confirming that you're adding the 1¼ cup sugar to the egg whites as you're beating them.
Yep. That you want to have your cake pans buttered. You want to have your oven on and hot. But I can go over that as soon as it's getting there. All right, that's enough of that. I wanted to give you an idea of how much time it takes. It isn't a real long time, but it does take a bit of time. But you want stiff peaks that really hold up.
And then Terry, could you show the consistency of the egg yolk
Right.
as well, and the sugar?
Now, I would usually want this just a little bit more thicker, but it's going to work. That would take maybe 3 to 5 minutes, but it's okay. That's our egg yolk. And usually, if you let it go a full 5 minutes, it'll be thicker than this. The first thing that we're going to do is take a section of our egg whites and start to lighten the yolks. And then we're going to take a little more. As these get lighter, we need a big bowl now. And we're going to put all the egg yolk and the first bit of egg whites in here. And then we're going to get the rest of our egg whites out. And there's a lot. A dozen makes a lot. It should be room temperature. And then we're just going to fold gently. You want to maintain volume, so you just keep folding. Just gently making sure to go all the way down to the bottom and turning it around. Now, we only have eggs and sugar in our bowl, nothing else, well, flavorings. So now we're going to take our flour. I'm using tonight's flour. I'm using Bob's Red Mill Fine Pastry Flour. It's really nice pastry flour. And into that, into the flour, I'm going to put the baking powder. It's always advised to sift your flour lightly over the top. You know, I bought all these new flour sifters and I've ended up sending them all back. They don't work at all. I have this flour sifter from 1900. Works perfect. You want to sift the flour because you don't want lumps. And also the sifted flour will mix in easier than unsifted flour, just because it makes it much finer. And it's just always folding and combining. We just have a little bit more. Do our people make sponge cakes very often?
Feel free to type in your experience with sponge cake if you like, folks. And Terry, is this the same basic sponge cake that you also used in the previous 2 classes?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I kind of went through the cake pretty much for the first one and kind of concentrate on the ladyfingers for the second class. And so I thought I'd go back and kind of review the sponge cake for this class. This is such a wonderful cake.
We've got folks saying they've tried it twice, never, never, once. And yeah, I'll mention that while you're mixing that, Terry. To those of you on the class, when I'll send this out tomorrow or Monday, you know, the recording of the class, so you can watch it again. And I'll send a link to the first class that Terry did. This is the 3rd in a series of cake classes. And in that one, she also goes a bit more in depth on the cake part of it.
Okay, now we've got our flour in. I know the first time I learned about princess cake, I took a class with Jim Willett from the Twin Cities. There's a famous chain of bakeries there, and I believe that one of the only bakeries that has consistently had a princess cake for sale all the time that you can buy there. I think it's just a very tiny one for $50-some. But the class I took from him, he was not as interested in the cake. He just used his standard white cake. And, you know, it isn't written in any law that you have to do the traditional sponge. But if you do the traditional sponge, you'll find that it holds the fillings much better than just a basic white cake would. The last thing we've got all our baking powder, all our ingredients. One thing about baking powder, I always recommend Rumford baking powder. To me, baking powder without aluminum is much, the flavor is really, really much better. It doesn't detract from your cake flavors. I know people who know baking powder, who do a lot of baking. They can taste the aluminum-y kind of metallic taste of most commercial baking powders. Since I first learned how to drive when I was 16 years old, I would drive my grandma around the Twin Cities trying to find Rumford baking powder. It is one of the original baking powders from 1850. There were 3 main companies in the U.S., Clabber Girl, Calumet, and Rumford. and they had there's a book called Baking Powder Wars, which I'm reading right now, and there was quite a lot of controversy about Rumford is with a baking soda mixed with cream of tartar, and that they can is thought by this company and by people who buy it to be way more pure than the alum and baking soda that's used in the others. And there were so many different ingredients tried in baking powder that there were times when scores and scores of people would get sick. And I think that's where my grandma got it from, because like in the early 1920s, baking powder was such a big deal. And she had me drive her all around the cities because this is all she would use, because it was all she considered safe. So now, and date your baking powder. Baking powder at the most really is good for a year. This one I just got in October. If I'm making a special cake like 6 months from now, I want it to be really fresh. So I will probably go buy a different baking powder and do check your dates on the baking powder box also. But it can ruin your whole cake if your baking powder doesn't work. Conversely, you can rely in a sponge cake on just the eggs to leaven it, but this is extra protection for your leavening. The butter is the last thing we're going to put in, which is very strange in most recipes. That isn't the way you do things. And we're just going to kind of drizzle it around the outside. It's warm, but not hot, melted. And this gives extra moistness to your cake, and it warms the batter. The thing about making a really good sponge cake is you want the oven spring to come quickly, and you don't want your cake struggling with cold batter. The warmer the dough, the better your cake will rise and finish. And then of course oven temperature 350. If you have it too hot, you might have a pyramid. Too cold, you could have a tough dry cake. It would just take too long. So 350 seems to be best for the sponge cake. Always have your pans buttered or sprayed ahead of time. And then I always use parchments in the bottom too. And then just for a little extra caution, often just give those a little spray too, and it doesn't need much. And then you set out our pans. And divide your batter. Kind of eyeball it.
Terry, do you know why it's called sponge cake? Is it particularly airy, and how is it airy?
Yeah, when and I'll show you when I cut one. There's like little air holes throughout.
What causes that?
Well, it's the eggs, the whipped eggs.
And are those 9-inch pans?
These are 9-inch. And we could weigh them and have them all exact, but it isn't gonna matter too much. They're pretty close. And then we go right into our oven. 350 for about 30 minutes.
you have a certain brand of cake pan that you like?
Um, Not, I guess I like sturdy pans. Uh, the commercial grade is nice. I was, like they're all aluminum pans that I use, but there are some that are more heavy grade, and like the Wilton Cake Store and like that generally sells a lighter grade. It still works, but I just think I like working with heavier pans. We can go this way. Number 2 is putting together a cake and filling it.
Terry, is it okay to put all 3 pans on one rack in the oven?
Yeah, and the middle oven, middle is the best for cakes.
Karen mentions that she got a real nice pan from King Arthur Flour.
Yes, I've often gotten really nice pans from King Arthur Flour, yes. Yeah, most of what they sell is good. And then there's Cake Arts, New York Cake, and the Web Restaurant Store, of course, has commercial grade that's really good. Now, these are cakes I baked yesterday. Generally, I do trimming. And then you can see all these nice, lovely little holes. Perhaps you can see, but there are just little tiny holes throughout the whole thing. And then I'm going to put it on a cake board. This is a 10-inch cake board. It's nice to have a cake board a little bigger than your cake and kind of center it. Now we're going to have one layer. It's a little bit thinner than the rest.
Terry, can you use a convection setting on the oven when you're baking that?
I used it right now. I'm using it right now.
Is there an advantage to that?
I think things bake quicker. And then the air is circulating. It's a nice feature on an oven. And I just got this stove recently, and I did not have a convection oven like this before, and I most always use the convection. It's really nice. Now this one I'm going to just cut in half, and we're going to have an extra layer left over. Raspberry jam. And then in the fridge is the pastry cream. Now, what you can do with a lot of cakes, you put a simple syrup on first. This cake has so many fillings that I think it is enough, and you don't have to. I think if you used any, like just a plain white cake, that might be drier. Then I might do a simple syrup, which is a cup of water, cup of sugar brought to a boil and then turned off and then let cool. And then you would brush that on, and that double ensures that your cake stays nice and moist. Now I'm gonna need this. We'll do our fillings and then we'll get to our marzipan. Our first is our raspberry jam. I made this jam on Monday from some raspberries I had in the freezer. Everybody loves raspberry jam, I think, right?
Mary, have you ever added flavoring to your simple syrups?
Yes. And you can kind of go with the flow, what you think would go good with this. You could add spirits. You could add Cointreau for a little citrusy flavor. You could, there is an almond one too, which might be good. Or you could just use a little almond extract. Almond in anything Swedish is always 100% wonderful.
Is your jam seedless?
I seeded it. I always seed it. Then we're going to get the offset spatula, and the second topping here is our pastry cream, which is just like the most wonderful custard. It's 2 cups of, well, the basic recipe for one cake is 2 cups of milk, 3 eggs. I suppose it's on the recipes. 3 eggs, a cup of sugar, and a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and vanilla and butter. It comes up really quick. There are a lot of steps to making pastry cream that people use, tempering the yolks and the eggs and mixing them back and forth. I took some classes maybe 20 years ago from, I think his name was John Schneider at the New Prague Hotel. And he was saying, "Why are you doing all that?" He said, "Mix it all together and put it on the stove and stand by it, and you're not going to have any trouble." And so that's the way I've done it ever since. Because I rarely have trouble. If it's going to break, it's usually from getting it too hot. If you're there, it's going to, I rarely had it go too far. Now I'm going to.
Noelle also asks, do you use a Foley food mill to seed the jam?
I use my little hand strainer. I don't usually, actually, you know, for raspberries, I don't usually fire up the Foley food mill. It's usually for bigger seeds, tomato seeds or something. I find it works just fine with just a regular household sieve. Okay, then we're gonna put on our second layer, and this layer is going to have cream and cream.
So you don't use the raspberry jam again?
No, raspberry jam is traditionally the bottom layer. That is the tradition. However, should you just happen to absolutely love raspberry jam and you want to use it again, do it. But it is awfully sweet. And and then with the marzipan, it is so sweet that I really do think 1 layer of raspberry is enough.
Plus, the Swedish authorities might come after you.
They're pretty true to the classic recipe. So actually, yeah, if things go well, and we were supposed to go to Sweden this past summer, but we didn't because of COVID. Of course, we didn't get to. But there's maybe we're going to try again for next summer. Who knows? Nobody knows if that'll work or not. But if it does, I plan on visiting quite a few bakeries if I can, and just see how their things are in comparison to what I've been trying to do all these years. Oh, wait, I forgot one thing. There's a bowl of whipping cream. This does get two things in this one also. Yeah. And then I could use that offset spatula again.
So you
Now,
cream and whipping cream?
yes, we're going to put whipping cream right on top of this. And this is our fortified whipping cream. And there are a number of ways you can fortify whipping cream. The reason you want to fortify it is, as you well know, when you make whipping cream, a lot of times after a period of time, it gets watery and starts to collapse on you. So if you can fortify it in some way to make it stay nice and firm, and this is just super firm, and I made it this morning. I'm using the mascarpone cream that I put in the mixer with a quart of whipping cream, 8 ounces of mascarpone cream, and a cup of powdered sugar. I believe that's the recipe that you have. You can also fortify whipped cream with gelatin. And there are recipes for that available online for sure. Or you can fortify it with by just putting, if you don't have to hold your cake really long, but you want a little extra holding power, you can mix up your whipped cream with powdered sugar, confectioner's sugar, and then add an extra tablespoon of cornstarch, and that'll help also. And it's not quite as complete as a mascarpone cream or a gelatin cream, but it's pretty darn good. And I've had cakes last a whole afternoon with just that. So now, this is the cream cake part of the cream cake. And then we just heap our whipped cream up on top. What are we doing for time? My cake turner thing and that bowl of powdered sugar. We'll get this going as fast as we can because we do have to get to the marzipan. And we want to go down the sides and we're going to give something to our marzipan to stick to. Now, if I was doing an 8-inch cake or smaller, which I think you'll find most of the ones that if you would go to the store to buy them, are the 8-inch. And then you can they mound up the cream on the top quite a lot so that it's almost bowl shaped. We're not going to quite do that today, but it's an option. It will take more marzipan than we have time to roll. Now, you would normally maybe want to set that in the fridge to set up.
Terry, Chris has just typed in that they went to Sweden last summer through Scandi Experience in Stillwater, and they had princess cake when they were there.
Oh, okay, great. Do we all know about marzipan, how marzipan is different from almond paste? Almond paste is basically just ground up almonds and sugar, and it's real grainy and difficult to work. You can take almond paste and make marzipan. You would do that by adding more sugar than is in it already, and you would add, usually it's an egg, an extra cup of powdered sugar. Commercially, they often use different types of syrups. At home, if you don't want to use something like a corn syrup, then honey works very well. This is a nice fresh unopened marzipan here. And you can see it's kind of like a workable dough. And you won't find that almond paste works like this.
What brand is that, Terry?
This is Mandolin. And it's readily available online. I'm going to add just a little bit more to that. And the first thing that is the most traditional is the coloring. Could somebody hand me gloves? In past, when I made this at farm table, we tried to use all organic coloring, which I would prefer, but the colors came out so terrible. It all looked brown and unedible. I don't know why. But here I have green and yellow food coloring. And we're just going to knead that in. And I had all green fingers today, so I wanted to maybe not have green fingers today. So you see how I'm kneading the color in. And it rather quickly becomes green. And if it's getting a little sticky, then you just have a little powdered sugar. And that comes up quite quickly. We have a green marzipan. And I'm gonna sprinkle it with some powdered sugar and put some down on the table. We have kind of formed, here's what I'm doing. I'm making kind of a disc shape. And do the best you can. And then these tools are called smoothers in cake art and frosting. And this will help. You don't want edges to come out and break. So if you kind of get everything smooth here at the beginning, you could have a little more success rolling and not worrying about it breaking up. Now we can put a little more down. Reach for a heavier rolling pin. Yeah, so we're going to start rolling this out from the center. And basically, it's like one turn. And then a little more sugar. And again. We want it about 1/4 of an inch thick. About a 14-inch circle.
That's powdered sugar.
Yes. Now, there was one very cute thing I saw someone do, and I've never done it, but I'm just going to mention it, was to take, at this point, a doily, just an old-fashioned Victorian doily, and you can roll that in, and then when you pull it up, you have the impression there, and then you just rub the powdered sugar in, and then sweep it away, and you have a wonderful pattern on the top of your cake. It was really, really pretty. And I have to give credit to Martha Stewart for that. Okay. I think we're pretty close. Let's see. We don't want a rolling pin. I'm gonna try to center it. Cake. And hope that we're. Let's see. Yeah, big enough. That's the main thing. Okay. Let me press it down. Up there. Okay. Then we take our smoothers and we try to work the sides smooth. We can spend time on this knife, or maybe there's a little paring knife in there. Now we can like roll this and make like a beaded finish on the edges. We had a little more time, and I just want to get quickly to roses, so we can spend a great deal more time on this and smoothing, and popping our cake together. All right, this is basically it, but it usually always has a red rose on top. I did up some red this morning, and I just want to show you quickly how to do this. You just take a small amount of Parmesan and put some red coloring in it, and then use like a couple pieces of plastic, and you want to roll this out thin. There's a little tube in there. I couldn't find my little tiny cutters today. I think they got moved somewhere, so I found something round, and what I'm going to do is cut 5 circles, and then I'm going to take just, well, one extra kind of for a base or a stem, which some people don't do, but I think it's kind of a nice thing to have a base to work on. And so I'm going to take this off for this part. Okay, and then we have like a holder here, if you can see. I don't know if you can see that. It's just a little piece of. But then we're going to take our plastic. Just with me another little piece there. Okay. Then we're just going to take it, and what you do is you just want to push out the edges so it's thin on the edges. And I don't try to put this by the camera, but it's just a round, nice little circle, and we're going to take that off, and we're going to start to build our rows by attaching it at the bottom and putting it around the first layer. And then we're going to do that for 5 of these. And you're just using your fingers, you just push out so the edges are thin and pliable. And we're going to put the second one. It's going to come on where at the meeting point of your last leaf petal. So we have a start. It's usually considered 5 for a rose. Marzipan is a favorite in a lot of countries, and a favorite with children, where at Christmas time and holidays, people make marzipan animals for the children to put around cakes. A Yule log cake might have little marzipan woodland animals all around it, which is really cool.
Terry, is that just marzipan with red food coloring? Is that right?
That's right. Okay. And we can kind of see, we kind of have a rose there. We have one more petal to put on, and we'll do that. And then, of course, we could spend time making leaves, making a pretty border. But I think you have the idea. And there is like all kinds of help online. There's a cake. If you want to take one of that, we do have a nice little rose there. And we generally plop it on our cake in the middle. And we can make little leaves to go around it. We can spend all kinds of time. And I think our hour is just about up. It should set up for an hour or two. And so this is the one I made this morning. And that big knife. Yeah. It's our princess cream cake. And we could have filled more cream, but I didn't have that much cream this morning. So this cake has more cream, but it's all very delicious. We have our layers of custard and raspberry. Any questions?
Well, yeah, there are a couple related to who's coming over for Princess Cake tonight.
Oh, everybody's welcome. All you need is a mask, I guess.
Well, we don't share the addresses of our instructors out publicly, but give me a call. No, it's just, it is. And Cynthia did ask, what happens to the leftover half of cake too?
Well, I have my son and daughter-in-law here. I usually get them to take a cake home with them with not too much pressure. And the other one, I don't know. It's up for grabs.
Well, one thing I would like to just acknowledge is that you have help there from your son and daughter-in-law, and to say thank you to them. And I'm at least glad that they can enjoy the cake with you.
Yes. Right.
And there was one other question, Terry, about the paddles that you were smoothing the marzipan and so on with.
Yep.
To me, it almost looks like a spackling knife you could use, but are there other things you could use in the kitchen?
I suppose, be resourceful. It's something about this, the way it's made. It is just really nice for cakes. A spackling knife might do the trick. I don't know. But yeah, it is handy and nice to have. They're really cheap. $5 or something for two. But yeah. And you can use them for all kinds of other icing things that you, fondants or things that you might be making.
Well, there are a lot of comments saying thank you, Terry, and how beautiful it is, and that they really appreciate you. So.
Well, thanks back to everyone.
And I did also just want to acknowledge, folks, you can tell how much care and time Terry puts into this by having two cakes just ready to go there, or one just ready to go to show us. And we really appreciate that too, Terry. I want to acknowledge that. So people, hope you enjoy making your own princess cake.
Yeah. Any questions, you can just forward them on.
Yeah, feel free to be in touch with me. I can connect you with Terry. And hope to see you again soon in a class, everybody. Terry, Nubia, and Joe, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.